Chapter 1. Louise put her empty wine glass down on the table. She turned to Norman. So, want to see it? She asked with a grin. Is Trump a liar? No, no, no. Rosalie put her hands to her ears. Do not mention that man. You'll ruin a wonderful evening. Norman smirked, pretended to zip his lips shut, then got up to follow Louise downstairs into her workshop. Louise owned this narrow Victorian townhouse in the part of the city known as Cabbage Town. The homes used to be workers' housing from the late 19th century, the Victorian era, when Irish immigration to Toronto was at its peak. These immigrants, out of necessity, supplemented meals with produce from their own gardens. Lots were so small that often the only green space for a garden was the front yard, and cabbage was the most common plant, thus its name. There were 5 of them sitting around Louise's kitchen table finishing dinner. The old pine table was tucked into a second-floor alcove surrounded by windows that faced the street. Opposite from Louise sat Daniel and his partner, Stuart. Daniel was another luthier, a guitar maker colleague of Norman's and Louise's. The 3 guitar makers met every few months, primarily to socialize over a meal and cry on each other's shoulders about shipping delays and problem clients. Daniel rubbed his hand over his shaved scalp, then gestured with his glass for Stuart to pour him more wine. Stuart cautioned him, "Last one, okay? Guess I'll be driving." Stuart picked up the bottle of Chardonnay and poured with an exaggerated flourish. He was a theater actor, after all. Well, okay, a semi-retired one, if he was being honest, and never wanted people to forget that. Next to Stuart was Norman's wife, Rosalie. She was short, claimed to be 5 feet, but was a force to be reckoned with and never shy of expressing her opinions. Her straight dark hair, still parted in the middle as it had been most of her life, hung down her back in its traditional braid. Part of her no-nonsense approach to life came from being a primary school teacher. I wonder where I got that from. But she adored the kids in her grade 5-6 split class. And kids being kids, they returned her affection. Louise led the way down a narrow set of wooden stairs that took them to the main floor. Her front room contained an old oak roll-top desk, a frayed leather couch, bookshelves, and oddly, a cello on a stand. The rest of the main floor, accessed through an internal glass door, was her workshop. A built-in bench ran the length of one side, directly in front of a pair of windows. The opposite wall was obscured by plywood shelving, floor to ceiling, filled to bursting with raw wooden parts, sets of rosewood and maple that would become the backs and sides of guitars, mahogany neck blanks, paired slices of spruce that were book-matched to be joined and become the tops of guitar bodies, slabs of black ebony for fretboards. Norman breathed deeply, inhaling the familiar and comforting smells of the wood, the glues, and lacquer. He followed Louise over to her workbench. Sitting on it, like a contented Buddha, was a very worn and scratched guitar case. It appeared to be made of heavy leather with riveting along its top edge. Carved into the leather top were the words Stradivari CRE. Norman's eyebrows rose. Holy shit, this is really it. Louise nodded. Just wait. She swung open the bottom portion that swiveled on a hinge, like the lid of a capped lighter. She took a deep breath, then reached in and slid out the guitar. She gently placed it on the blanket that covered the adjacent bench. Katerina told me that depending on who you talk to, this is one of only 4 or 5 known guitars made by Stradivari. Most people don't even know he made guitars. Norman couldn't take his eyes off it. This must be worth a fortune. The National Gallery has it insured for $500,000. That's probably conservative. Norman imagined its rarity would quadruple that value, if not render it priceless. Can I touch it? He asked, and he reached out. Louise grabbed for something behind her. Here, put these medical gloves on. Norman did, and picked up the guitar, surprised by its light weight. It was typical for its time. It had 5 pairs of gut strings and was small, no more than 40 inches long, with a narrow and gently curved body. This instrument was not as ornate as some that had remained intact over the centuries, but it was achingly lovely for all that. The back and sides were a flamed sycamore, a soft maple that had a golden tint. On the back of the peg head were inset the words, Ant, period, Stradivarius, comma, Cremona, SF 1700. While Norman examined the guitar, he said, I know you started to explain why you have this, but tell me again. This has been loaned by the National Music Museum in the US for the show at the National Gallery Katerina is curating. Opus, the Music and Instruments of the Enlightenment. It opens June 1st, in just over 2 months. When they received it, Katerina noticed that there was something wrong with the fretboard. See, right here, Louise pointed to the treble edge of the ebony veneer that was the main central portion of the neck's playing surface. See how it's not flat like it should be? And notice this lip here? Louise poked it with her gloved fingernail. Katerina got really concerned that this might have occurred during shipping. She wants it repaired before the show opens. Why me? Why not someone at the museum? There's no one capable in the Ottawa area, and she knows you restored a Renaissance guitar for the Royal Ontario Museum. She couldn't think of anyone else. And she let you bring it to Toronto? I'd be freaking out about liability and insurance. Apparently, even the insurer is a bit freaked at what appears to be shipping damage, and they're willing to let you deal with it. The insurance will cover it wherever it travels in the country. That's why I could drive it down here. Katerina actually begged me to do the delivery. The National Gallery is currently in a legal dispute with their contracted art handlers who damaged a Henry Moore sculpture as they were uncrating it. The gallery hasn't had time to research a new service, so this guitar was left hanging. We were Katerina's solution. You can imagine how paranoid I was, afraid to stop anywhere, even to pee. While Louise was talking, Norman looked closer at the surface of the neck. Yes, the inner veneer of the fretboard was indeed lifted a bit, but it didn't look like damage. There was something odd about it, but he couldn't put his finger on it, so he kept it to himself to think about later. He turned to Louise. I guess she goes home with me. One more page. Home for Norman and Rosalie was only a 5-minute drive from Louise's in Riverdale, a neighborhood of primarily single-family homes. Theirs was a modest 2-story semi-detached at 27 Victor Avenue, but had the astonishing inner-city perk of its own front yard parking pad. No need to struggle to find street parking. Norman pulled into the drive, turned off the headlights, and shut off the car. He turned to his wife. What is it, Roz? You're awfully quiet. She waited a beat, then said, I was thinking about Louise, about how she feels having 2 couples at her table now that she's alone. How long has it been since her divorce? 2 months? 3? It must still be pretty raw. He nodded. She does keep her problems pretty buried. I was going to ask her about things privately. Yes, I saw you tilt your head at me when we went downstairs, and I knew what you meant. But we got distracted by this guitar. Speaking of which, Norman continued, I really want to get it in the house. I'm going to be totally paranoid about it till it leaves my hands. It's already freaking me out. It could be worth millions if I screw this up. Norman took the Strad up to their bedroom. He planned to keep it within sight or nearby until his work was done. Louise called up from the kitchen. There's a message. Shall I listen? It's long past 2 a.m. Leave it till the morning. It's probably Julia in London. Who else would call on a Sunday night and likely forget about the time difference? At breakfast, as Norman stood at the Keurig waiting for it to brew, Rosalie pressed play on the answering machine. They listened. Coffee was forgotten. They dressed quickly and haphazardly, hands shaking, anxiety brewing.